Well, welcome and good evening. We are approaching the summer solstice, so it means we are knee-deep into list building season, which is why it's a perfect time for the Persnickety process, highly selective admissions. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to understand selectivity and admissibility. Our goal this evening is to bring you inside the mind of an admissions officer so you can see beyond things like admissions rate and really understand admissibility, even at the most highly selective level, by looking at factors like admit rate, applicant profile, and institutional priorities. We will start with that most familiar one, the admit rate. Without Googling anything, for those of you out there in the audience, how would you rank NYU selectivity? Easy, medium, hard, or super hard?
Go ahead and throw your answers into the chat box or the comments box on your streaming platform. Let's see. I don't know, James. If I was not an admissions professional, I would probably say that NYU is like medium hard.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good guess. So we'll kind of look historically, by which I mean 3 years ago. Historically, 3 years ago in 2020, NYU had an acceptance rate of about 21%. Not super high, but not like totally rejected either. So like medium hard.
And I just want to warn everybody, if you're drinking something, like swallow. If you need to sit down, because you might be shocked by this next piece of data.
Yeah, so that was again 21% about 3 years ago. For this most recent year, NYU had an admit rate of just 8%. That's EIGHT, 8% of its first year applicants, a drop of over 60% in just 3 years. The thing is, NYU is not an outlier there. We're seeing more and more schools that have been selective historically, like medium or medium hard, drop to below 10% levels that were previously seen only in Ivy League type schools. As a maybe fun or scary point of reference, around the time many of you parents watching were probably applying to colleges, Harvard in 1990, their admit rate was 18%, which is over double what NYU's is now. And we won't even mention that Harvard is now around 3.41%.
Yeah, so don't look at your screen. I'm going to take it away. But it really has been a huge change. And I think the tricky thing is here that when you look at this 8% admit rate as a single measure of admissibility, which is what most people know about and would look at, it's logical. It does seem kind of straightforward. But as just an example of that other half of the story, Cornell University has that same identical 8% admit rate as NYU. So does that mean that if I'm a strong student, I've got really good grades, I would have exactly the same chances of getting into either school? Something about that doesn't quite sound right. So I think we need to look closer at the academic profile. And that's that other half that we're talking about. It's not just admit rate. It's also applicant profile and the spread at which these institutions will admit or not admit students. So let's look at some data.
Yep, our favorite here at college is data. So as you see on your screen, NYU and similar universities like it want strong, involved, diverse students. NYU in particular recently had a mid-50 SAT range between 1350 and 1530 and 31 to 35 for ACT. And their average unweighted GPA was 3.7. Their application question asks you how you would contribute to a diverse community. Another thing to keep in mind is they admit students from a wide range of academic profiles as evidenced by those test scores.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such an important thing to notice, right? Is that even though they have this admit rate of 8%, which is alarming, their average GPA is still not astronomically high. It's strong, but it's like attainable strong. And you can see there is that range as evidenced, as James noted, in the SAT of 200 points for SAT and 4 points for ACT, which is a pretty big spread. Then if we look contrastingly, and unfortunately, even though things like GPA are among the most important parts of a Cornell application review, they don't actually publish what that GPA is. So same admit rate where you'll see 8%, and then you'll see the first big change where although the top range of the SAT and ACT is not that different, right? It's a smidge higher than NYU. You can see that the bottom range is much higher, right? Yeah. So we have a much smaller range of what is admissible at Cornell. And you can also see that although we don't know, or it's not published, what the average GPA, hint, it's pretty darn close to 4.0 unweighted. is that 82% of the class that's admitted comes from the top 10% of their high school across the board. And so that tells you about the strength of their applicant pool. So you can see it's really pretty darn different between the applicant profile. So that's that second half of the story.
Yeah, to put an even finer point on it, which I don't know if you want to hear this, but schools at that most highly selective levels, using Harvard as an example, consistently see 85 to 90% of all their applicants as students who academically make the cut. So, how do you stand out from that huge pool? A shiny high school transcript of straight A's is necessary, but get this, not sufficient for a student to be picked among that elite 3.4% at
Mhm.
plus institution. So, as we've kind of been alluding to, that brings us to fit and institutional priority. That may be a term less familiar to a lot of people than admit rate. Kelsey, what is an institutional priority?
Yeah, in essence, at its most simple form, institutional priority, the current values of any school, what it wants to work on, what it's looking for. And every school, Ivy, Ivy plus or not, has them. So when at these kind of really highly selective schools, 85 to 90% of all of their applicants have that perfect 4.0 fit, which is basically resonance with institutional priorities, is how students differentiate themselves. And at each and every highly selective school, even though we're lumping them together as the Ivy League, for example, they are looking for different things in its students. So you really want to look at them as unique bodies, just like every applicant is unique, every student is unique. And if you pay close attention to what any school is saying about itself, in a mission statement, an info session, a video on its website, just at the language that they use, you'll actually see what it believes to be important begin to shine through.
Yeah, to give you some examples of the differences among these Ivy type institutions, schools like Columbia and Brown want to see that you're going to use their unique educational models to make a real change in the world, even as an undergrad. A school like Yale is looking for curious students who are interested in impacting their local community, while Stanford is looking for disruptors who care about the world around them.
Mhm.
One thing that's similar among them is that all of them focus on research and diversity.
Mhm.
I was recently kind of combing through the various Ivy League and Ivy type school like websites and informational sessions, and one thing that struck out to me was that they do all talk about research. The difference here is that a school like NYU doesn't expect that every high school student has actually done research, but they just want to know that you're excited to make use of the research opportunities that they're offering you once you get into college. On the other hand, an Ivy Plus institution is looking for students who have already participated and maybe participated heavily in research and likely have actually published something.
Such a good point. And so, kind of, what do we want to leave you with as our listeners? I think, I work with students day in, day out. And most of what I spend my time doing is helping the student identify who they are at their core, helping them find colleges who then fit that core in every way, academically and otherwise, and then demonstrate through evidence and through their writing who they really are in their application. So the idea of the whole application as evidence and an expression of their identity is what will actually make them stand out and be more admissible, even at the highly selective and possibly, even more so at the highly selective level. So once your student has a clear sense of their identity, they can narrow into the schools that will celebrate that identity, welcome the applicant for all they have to offer. Now, that's not going to make those 3 to 5% or even 8% admit rates any more forgiving, but it will help the student give themselves their best chance in admissions. So we want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We're about done. We do have about a minute left for some questions. So if you do have questions, please pop them into the comments box on your viewing platform, and we'll get to probably just one or two. But I think first, James, can you shed some light on how Ivies, just quickly, actually read applications?
Yeah, so again, Harvard is a really instructive model, specifically because for various reasons we have a lot of knowledge and insight into their process. So students are ranked on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being actually the best, and 4 being the kind of the weakest rating on things like academics, sports, research. And students who are going to get in are expected to have at least a 2 or even a 1 in several of those categories. As an example of like the types of research that would get a 1 or a 2 at Harvard, it has to be so in depth and I would say so complicated that the admissions officers need a faculty reader to come in and explain what the student actually did, so that even a very educated, intelligent, average adult wouldn't know, because it's so focused and so nuanced what
Mhm.
those research projects are.
Really
So it
great.
really takes a lot to kind of break into that Ivy League level.
Yeah. And usually, as James said, they have several twos or ones plus an additional hook that might be significant artistic talent, being a recruited athlete, being a legacy, things like that. So it's a lot of different layers that is, I kind of think about it as the student that is competitive at a Harvard is a student who's basically at the level of a college graduate. So you can think about it that way too. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to put our contact information into the comments box here so that as you walk away, if you find that you have additional questions, you please reach out. Hope you've enjoyed tonight's talk. We'll see you next time.
Have a good evening.